Welcome in, guys. It is Friday, and you all know what that means. It is another episode of Britt's Fantasy Blitz. I am your host, Britt Flinn of Fantasy Alarm and Better Sports Network. Guys, this is the final Friday we have before we have actual real football. And in addition to that, it's also the biggest fantasy football draft weekend of the season. So, as always, we have a ton of stuff to talk about. Welcome to the show. Thank you guys so much for joining. If you're new here, like the show, subscribe to Fantasy Alarm and the Better Sports Network YouTube channel so that you can get notifications every time the show comes on. If you are a loyal follower, thank you for being here. You guys already know the drill. Please comment in the chat. Again, like and subscribe. And as I said, we've got a ton of stuff to talk about today. We're going to talk about some of the top news around the NFL. We're going to discuss some injury news, some popcorn headlines, because we're always hungry at this time of day. And we're also going to talk about some teams that may be in trouble. In addition to that, we're going to talk about some underdog pick'ems for week 1 and season long, since there are only 6 days until the start of the NFL season. And we will be joined by a special guest, Herms NFL of Draft Sharks, to talk some tight end strategy, fantasy football happy hour, and then some players on his do not draft list. So let's just jump into it right away. TJ Hawkinson signed a gigantic contract extension yesterday for 4 years, worth up to $68.5 million. Is Minnesota smart for doing this when they have to pay Justin Jefferson and find a new quarterback for next season? I just really don't know how they're going to make all that work, especially considering all of the holes that they have on defense. They've basically cut everybody who they've drafted. Their defense is one of the worst in the leagues. That's what put them in a lot of terrible positions last season. You know, their record said that they were 13-4, but 8 of those games were by 1 score or more. They should not have won 13 games last year. And I'm worried that if they don't shore up that defense and spend some money on actually fortifying that they're going to be in a lot of trouble. So I'm a little bit out on the contract for TJ Hawkinson. If you guys agree, let us know in the chat. Even if you don't agree, let's get some conversation going. Thanks, Mr. Scampers. Thank you, sellers, for being in there. And my dad is also here. Hello, Dad. In other news, and kind of shocking, especially considering that he is going in the top 3 picks, ESPN's Dan Graziano reported yesterday that the 49ers are planning to sit the Panthers more than the Panthers because they are aware of his injury history and they don't want to overwork him. This is not the kind of news that we want to hear from a guy who's typically going in the first 3 picks. We even kind of got a little glimpse of it last season before Elijah Mitchell got hurt. It seemed that Elijah Mitchell took on the bulk of the running carries, where Christian McCaffrey was used as more of a pass catching back. If they decide to split his workload, I'm not quite sure that he's going to return top 3 value, especially RB1 value. So that's going to be something that we're going to have to keep a very close eye on. Toronto Dave in the chat, Alarm, thank you so much for joining us. In some other really unexpected news today, Mike Evans' agent has released a very long statement and has set September 9th as the deadline in contract talks with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. This has ignited a firestorm of trade rumors and speculation. We've already been talking about how Mike Evans' value may fall off now that Baker Mayfield is in at quarterback, or potentially Kyle Trask. But is this something that we should be interested in watching, especially since his ADP is already so depressed? I think it is. I think that there's a very good chance that Mike Evans does not get a deal done. He is older. I think that the Buccaneers are kind of in rebuild mode. And if he does get traded, an ADP of around wide receiver 35 could pay off dividends going throughout the end of the season. So we'll have to keep a very close eye on that. And some good news, Dolphins Tyreek Hill will not face any discipline from the league or the Dolphins for the incident out of Florida Marina earlier this year. That's very good news for those of you who had already drafted him. And now that Cooper Cup is injured and CMC's usage is in question, it could cause him to shoot up draft boards even more. So keep that in mind as you go into your drafts over the weekend. Keeping with the Dolphins, quarterback Tua Tagovailoa is also not going to get a contract extension until the beginning of the next offseason at the earliest. This has to put a little bit of unnecessary pressure on him because with the injuries, these concussions, it's nothing that he can do to prevent these. Yet Miami seems to not have 100% faith in him. His numbers have looked good when he's been on the field, but I think that we have to look at it as the organization is very concerned about his injury history and doesn't want to commit uh, until to a bigger contract until they see him get through an entire season first. If you didn't know this was a Dolphins show, apparently it is now because there is still more Dolphins news. Fullback Alec Ingold has reset the market for the position, signing a 3-year extension worth $17.2 million. Fullbacks, as an average, only play 40% of their team's snap share. So, how should this make star running backs feel? I think it is something to talk about. And maybe, just maybe, this contract will do something to open up the minds of GMs around the league to running back contracts of the future. Because think about it, fullbacks are typically only out there to block. Fullbacks rarely get carries, whereas running backs, especially very good running backs, are not only asked to carry the ball to score touchdowns, they are asked to play a major role in pass protection and protecting a team's biggest asset in the quarterback. It doesn't really make a huge amount of sense that these fullbacks are getting more money than a lot of the very important running backs in the league. So hopefully the league will see that, will adjust, and then we can put all of this running back drama behind us. CBS Sports has released the best of list across the league. Quarterbacks, no surprise at number one, is Patrick Mahomes, then Josh Allen and Joe Burrow. It's a little bit surprising that Jalen Hurts was left out of that, especially after his great season last year. It's surprising to me that people are still disrespecting Jalen Hurts and what he was able to do with the Eagles last season. At running back, again, pretty much no surprise, Christian McCaffrey at number one, then Nick Chubb and Austin Eckler. Wide receiver, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, Tyreek Hill, Stephon Diggs, Devontae Adams, and CeeDee Lamb. To me, it's a really puzzling omission that they left out Cooper Kupp, who up until last year's when he got injured, he was the leading fantasy wide receiver and he was the number one fantasy wide receiver the year before. I don't know if it's his age. I don't know if it is worries about Matthew Stafford or that team as a whole, but that omission was a little puzzling to me. To round out with tight end, again, we have no surprise Travis Kelsey, Mark Andrews, and George Kittle. Dustin Ledke, trade Evans to the Bills, please. I think that that would be absolutely insane. We've talked about Dalton Kincaid so much and that he has a pathway to targets because Buffalo didn't do much or anything really to bring in a second wide receiver. If they bring in Mike Evans and another deep threat who can actually catch the ball, sorry, Gabe Davis truthers, but that would make them pretty much unstoppable. So let's hit on some injury news here. As you probably have heard, Cooper Kupp re-injured his hamstring. They're calling it, quote, a setback. And he is now questionable for week one. They've even come out so far to say that Van Jefferson is going to be the wide receiver one on the Los Angeles Rams roster if Cooper Kupp can't go. Early on, way back in the season, if you read the wide receiver sleepers league on fantasyalarm.com, I had Van Jefferson listed as a sleeper candidate. Now it's looking better and more certain that he is going to provide some fantasy value, especially early on. And he is going at the very back end of your drafts, if he's even drafted at all. So again, going into the biggest draft weekend of the season, keep your eye out on Van Jefferson, keep your eye out on Cooper Kupp's injury status, and maybe have that in your back pocket as a pivot. Jeff Wilson, running back for the Dolphins, is on IR. He is out for the first 4 games, absolutely, but possibly longer after Mike McDaniel said that they have to wait and see how his body feels and that there's a possibility that he returns this season, but they're just not sure. Personally, I hate this after they did not get Dalvin Cook. They did not succeed in getting Jonathan Taylor. It seems like probably Leonard Fournette or possibly even Kareem Hunt could be knocking on the door and making a phone call of Dolphins camp if this injury is as severe and long term as they're kind of making it out to be. The Colts' Jelani Woods was put on IR, possibly putting his entire season in jeopardy. And Dolphins cornerback Jalen Ramsey is also on IR. Brandon in the chat says, I got offered Cup Mixon for Jacobs, Mike Williams. Any opinion, half PPR? I'm assuming that this is redraft. If it's dynasty, let me know. Either way, I think it's a pretty lateral trade. I wouldn't really make that. It seems like you're not really doing anything to better your team either way. So I would just try to counter and maybe get a little bit more juice for yourself in that. Popcorn news, real quick. Travis Kelce is pleading for Chris Jones to come back to in his typical quirky way. He said, "You're really scaring me, man." So it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out, especially as Chris Jones was a huge part of why the Chiefs were so good at defending the run last season. Colts GM Chris Ballard is never going to give JT up, and he's never going to let him down, saying he will not quit on the relationship with Jonathan Taylor. This makes me think that this entire issue is because of Jim Irsay and the things that he is saying, and it's very much giving Jerry Jones vibes, as the GM wants to keep this player on the team, but the owner is causing a roadblock, keeping it from happening. Let's go ahead and jump into teams that are in trouble real quick before we bring our very special guest, Herms NFL, on. I want to talk about teams that are in trouble. And in particular, first off, we have to talk about the Arizona Cardinals, especially after this clip surfaced yesterday.
Who drove over here? Let me see your hands. Who took the bus? Did you have fire in your gut? Did you? We're here for a reason. Don't get that twisted, okay? We're here for a reason to win games. So if you didn't have that fire in your gut, you better light the fire pretty fast, okay? So everyone's on time. Everyone's got fire in their gut. How you go about your day is going to be critical for our success as a team. Winning behavior is winning behavior on a daily basis to become the best player that you can be, so we can be the best team that we want to be. Don't show up a minute late, I'm fining you. Because you're not putting yourself behind the team. You're putting yourself in front of the team if you do that, and it's bull, because your buddies are counting on you. You understand? Jeff's counting on you. Nick's counting on you. I'm counting on you. Hump is counting on you to do the right. So do the right, or we're going to get waxed. You understand? Truthfully, if you said, hey, JG, what do you want your team to look like? I want them to be killers. Truthfully, silent killers. Killers. Okay? So be who you are. Just understand, I'm looking for killers.
Chat, just let me know. Is there nothing more uninspiring than that entire speech? I can tell you, I will light a fire in my gut faster from eating Taco Bell than I will from that speech. That entire situation, and Scampers brings it up in the chat, the players looked so confused. They looked flabbergasted. They had no idea what was going on in that room. The fact that he called himself JG instead of coach, this team has major issues. Quarterback issues, tight end issues, defensive issues, coaching issues, you name it. This guy is the king of cringe. I know that everybody who is an Eagles fan has said they are so glad that they got rid of him. And Dustin in the chat said that he was more inspired by the Zoom interaction. Producer Ernie, if you've got that one loaded, let's just give everybody in the chat some context of what Dustin's talking about.
Hey, what's up, man? How you doing? Good. Good. Shoo, 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 shoo. Shots, explosives, you can run.
Guys, what was that? I put it on Twitter. I feel like it was when Michael Bay is on strike and the backup director is asked for his vision of a movie. Oh my God, that made me physically cringe. Bottom line, Cardinals are in so much trouble. Another team that's in trouble, Indianapolis Colts, they only have 4 wide receivers currently on their roster. One of them is a rookie in Josh Downs. If any of them get hurt, we also talked about Jelani Woods being on IR. They have 0 depth. And that's not even talking about their running back situation for the first 4 weeks. You've got a rookie quarterback, you've got a brand new head coach. The Indianapolis Colts are in major, major trouble. Another one's the Las Vegas Raiders. They only have 8 offensive linemen on their active roster, and those 8 aren't very good. We've heard about Devontae Adams being unhappy with the front office and how they're running their offense. Jimmy Garoppolo needs a stout offensive line to be efficient. Super worried about them. The New England Patriots at quarterback. They cut Bailey Zappi and Malik Cunningham. So they've got Mac Jones, and then they brought in Matt Corral, who hasn't played a snap in a regular season game because he was rehabbing an ACL injury. If something happens to Mac Jones, and it very well could in a very tough schedule with the AFC East and NFC East, they are in a ton of trouble. Finally, the Detroit Lions, I think we all know their wide receiver situation is dismal. They only have 5 wide receivers on their roster to start the season, and it could get pretty gross. So that's it for our news for today. You can check out all the injury news, all the updates in the Fantasy Alarm 2023 Fantasy Football Draft Guide. As I mentioned, it is the home stretch. This is the biggest draft weekend of the year. Go get that draft guide. Go get that cheat sheet. Help yourself win your fantasy football league. If you want a little bit more than that, we have a 7-day free trial for our All Pro subscription, which includes DFS for every sport, every seasonal thing, everything that is on our site. You can get with our All Pro package today, fantasyalarm.com/all-pro to sign up for that. And it includes the draft guide and cheat sheet as well. It also includes the Discord. So as there are a ton of drafts, make sure that you connect to our Discord channel once you've signed up for a package and ask your questions to our experts who will be grinding all weekend long to help you dominate your drafts. All right, let's bring in our special guest because I have yammered on way too long. Herms NFL of Draft Sharks. How's it going?
We are out here in these streets thriving. It's a Friday afternoon. What is up? Hello.
It's so good. We are thriving, man. We have grinded so hard all off season long to make sure that we are ready for this very moment. And this moment is finally here. How are you feeling about your drafts? Do you have any in person, or are you like me where you just have a ton online?
They're mostly online, but I do have my home league draft coming up on Sunday. I have carved out time from my busy schedule to be able to go to the commissioner's house and draft in the basement and do the thing. So that's going to be super fun. I'm very much looking forward to that one specifically.
Yeah, the home leagues are a different animal. They're so much fun. You can learn so much by doing these industry leagues and things like that, but the home leagues are just they throw all kinds of things at you. But I want to welcome you to Fantasy Happy Hour since it is Friday, and we just kind of relax and kind of talk a little bit and shoot some things around. Dustin in the chat, Dame Overboard, Sellers, Mr. Scampers, all super happy that you're here. So I just want to know, how is this draft season treating you? Because this is the busiest time of year. So I know that you are out there grinding.
It's going. It's weird because so this is my first year working full time in the industry, so it's kind of weird to wrap my head around the fact that like I have to help other people do well while also carving out enough time for me to do well in my own leagues. So I'm just thinking like different assignments that I get for certain articles where it's like, we want you to tackle like non-PPR for this article. And it's like, well, I don't play in any of those leagues. And it's like, well, Herms, it's not about you anymore. Okay. It's not just about you. So like balancing all that's kind of tough. But I do think at least through being super involved in just diving as deep as I can to help out other people, I'm learning more things about like my own biases and certain things like that. So like in a way, it's kind of working out in a certain fashion to the point where I feel weirdly more prepared than ever, but we'll see if that actually ages well.
I believe that it will. I've done enough drafts with you. I know that you know what you're talking about, but you're right. Trying to balance out the grind of creating content to help everybody else out and helping out your own team. In my big home league, everybody is like, I'm stealing your takes. I'm stealing your players. I know how much fab you're bidding on this person. And in addition to that, I also got plagued with injuries last year. So I actually ended up, and I'm saying this, I'm coming clean on air before this draft season. I finished last in that league because everybody knew my very next move. They already knew. So there is a certain aspect of putting yourself out there that can kind of harm you. On the plus side of that, I will be getting a little trophy with a little cherub with a tap handle that pees. So I cannot wait to get that this Sunday and add it to the mantle behind the Treylon Burks ball. So we just covered the Cardinals' cringy moment that someone thought would be a good idea to put on film. So what are your thoughts on that and the Cardinals as a whole? Because that just gives me the ick.
I think the fact that he wanted silent killers worked, because the lack of any noise or emotion from those players, depending on how you look at it, that's the only positive spin I can even draw. But like, just watching their faces, especially just looking at how like bored James Conner was specifically, I was like, this dude does not care about what's happening in this room at all. And I think it's just really emblematic of the fact that, I mean, these guys know what the assignments is. Like, it's their job. They're getting paid to be there. They're professional athletes. Like, obviously, they're like stoked that they get to do that, I'm sure. But of all the 32 circumstances to be in, I'm pretty sure that's like toward the bottom of the list of the ones that you're excited about. But I'm sure that they will feel better in 2024 when perhaps Caleb Williams is there and Marvin Harrison Jr. is there. Whoever, they'll be happier later. It's just going to take some time.
Yeah, it's definitely going to take some time. And I think Zach Ertz's face also said it all because his wife just retired. He's not going to be ready for week 1, or at least that's 90-10 chance that he's not going to be ready. The look on his face, I could see the wheels turning and see him saying, I don't think that I want to be here and do this anymore. And that was just really unfortunate that got put out on film because, it's sad for these players who have devoted their entire lives to being athletes, to being in the league, and then to get stuck in this situation. It's just so bad. So I want to know how pumped you are for the regular season. Obviously, we're all pumped, but do you have a million drafts going on this weekend, or are you pretty much firmly entrenched in dynasty formats?
Most of my leagues are dynasty leagues at this point. Most of the content that I do, I'd say a plurality of the content that I do is centered around dynasty stuff. But I always say, like, in my heart of hearts, I'm still a redraft boy. There's something about the format that's just super fun because as enjoyable as dynasty is and your ability to, make the rookie draft decisions, kind of build it your own way. Because I still play Madden all the time. I love franchise mode. Like, it's fun. It's awesome. But redraft being the game where you have to solve the puzzle fastest that's a different thrill. It's a different experience. And I think that there's nothing quite that beautiful. No offense to Dynasty. I love it. I cover it. I do all sorts of stuff about that. But I just love that race to solving the puzzle and getting the right guys off waivers and being like, haha, you suck, you suck, you suck, you suck, and just taunting all of my friends.
It is great. And I'll add another level to that onion. I'm way too impatient for Dynasty, so redraft scratches that itch for me. I love redraft because if I'm not doing that well, you know what? This doesn't matter. I can pick up this guy off of waivers and I don't have to worry about if he's going to play next season. I don't have to worry about how old this player is and if he's going to come back. If I win this year, then I'm in, baby. I love it.
Bingo.
So what strategy do you typically like to use when constructing your team? Because we've talked about it on here. There are a ton of different builds. Zero RB is one that has gained a ton of steam, and I just can't get on board with that. So which one do you typically like to use when you're drafting?
I'm gonna echo that. Sorry, Kevin, if you're listening, but yeah, I can't do the zero RB thing. It's not for me, especially because we've seen what is it? I mean, just ballparking it, obviously not the exact number, but like what, 28 or 29 of the backfields are committees now. Like that's just how it works. Okay, so those guys toward the tippy top, with your Nick Chubbs and your Derrick Henrys and stuff. Like, I don't care how old they are. I don't care what's going on because, like, they're the guy. All right. And if you're telling me that one of the things that I can do with one of my first couple picks is secure a running back who's going to get, you know, like 75 or 80% of the carries or something, they're like, yeah, please, I will gladly accept all of that. So, like, I like building through that. But then also, I've learned over time that I don't like playing the tight end game very much. I think it's better for me to just bite the bullet with one of the first few picks and say, oh, okay, Mark Andrews is still there. All right, fine. Cool. I'll do that. Okay, TJ Hawkinson's still there. All right. Okay, cool. Fine. And just I don't know. Fishing at the end is very difficult, but I will say my spicy take, just real quick. I am probably going to stop doing the late round quarterback thing because I've
Mm.
noticed enough of a difference between like the upper echelon and the guys beneath it now that like it's still a viable strategy if you want to wait. I'm definitely not, crapping all over that by any means, but like Justin Herbert, where he's being drafted, like I have a really good feeling about that. I'm perfectly fine taking Jalen Hurts and guys like that where they're going because there's just like so much extra value. And every redraft I've done so far, at least recently, I have been taking one of those guys super early, even as early as like the fifth, sixth round, something like that. And I feel fine about how the team ends up.
Yeah, that's the thing about how just the overall strategy in the redraft community has kind of shifted over the past couple seasons. We're seeing quarterbacks getting really pushed up and juiced. Back in the past, even 5 years, you could wait until like round 10 and still get a decent quarterback. You can't do that anymore. So you've had to adjust your strategy. And unless you're finding like a diamond in the rough, like Jalen Hurts was last season, there's not really that many in that tier this season. I will say I like Trevor Lawrence at quarterback 8 where he's going, but aside from that, it's just kind of a crapshoot. And then you have to spend a bench spot, and in addition to that, you have to play matchups and figure out who am I going to start week to week, who has the better matchup, and that's going to drive you insane. So I'm totally with you on that. We'll get into your tight end strategy coming up after this next question, actually, because you have a lot to say on that. But I want to know, as a Steelers fan, because you are a humongous Steelers fan, they did not perform exactly great last season, but they were still very close to making the playoffs. The preseason highlights have looked wonderful. So what are your expectations for the team, and do they differ from your expectations as an analyst versus a fan?
Yeah, it's the toughest question because I obviously like I try to be impartial about it, but also like I'm a fan, so like that's tough. But also, it's the team that I like follow the closest, so I read more about them than I do about the other teams because like I read plenty about the other 31 teams to do my job, but in my free time, I'm not just going to pull up and say, like, oh, I wonder what the Colts are doing right now. Like, no, I don't care about that. I want to know what the Steelers are doing. So, watching all the stuff that has unfolded, even going back to like OTAs and like mini camp and stuff, and just like reading the through line of like the drum beats for the certain players and like what the scheme's going to be like and stuff. I'm glad that they're adding that dimension of the big play element and like really trusting Pickett to push the ball downfield. But I think people need to be prepared for this still being an incredibly run heavy offense like it was for the second, I wouldn't not entirely second half, quote unquote, but like from the bye week on last year. Like that's when their pass rate went super low and they just like fed Najee a bunch of volume and it worked because they're like drive success rate skyrocketed, their ability to just like get into the red zone with more consistently skyrocketed. And I think people expecting a huge step forward for somebody like George Pickens may be a little bit disappointed. I don't entirely think that they're going to be able to support multiple fantasy viable wide receivers. I still think it's going to just be Deontay Johnson and Pat Fryermuth being like the second target in there. But the Jalen Warren Najee Harris thing is where I start to get a little bit kind of weird about it, because like on one hand, hidden behind my microphone on the screen is an encased autographed Najee helmet. So I love Najee Harris and I want him to be that dude. But they've consistently talked about how Jalen Warren's going to be involved. And I don't think it's going to be as involved as some people have, hypothesized and thrown out there. I think the new Zeke Pollard take is a little bit much, because I'm sorry, but Jalen Warren is not Tony Pollard. But there is some credence to that, just given that they're going to pound the rock as they always do. And maybe he'll mix in as a third down dude and be enough to be a consistent flex every week. And Najee can still be one of those super electric players, because he was like top 10 toward the end of last year in that stretch after the bye week in fantasy points and all sorts of other fun metrics that we don't have time to go over. But like, I don't know. I think funnel it through the backfield, have some fun with it, and spicy. Kenny Pickett, viable QB2 option in Superflex. Don't be afraid to draft him. I think he'll do just well enough to give you some floor, and it'll be cool.
Ooh, I love that. I love some spicy takes on here. And I'm with you on Najee. I think that people tend to look at his just efficiency metrics and that's it. They don't take into account that offensive line was putrid, straight up putrid. And they did a lot in this offseason to actually improve it. And Najee was playing with a freaking metal plate in his foot for the first few weeks. Like, I couldn't walk with a metal plate, let alone play on a field. So I'm with you on Najee. I think that people are overlooking him just based on one little sample of data. So I have a lot of Najee, and I love that. And I love that for your Steelers. One of my very best friends is a Steelers fan, and he's even accepting of me as a Cowboys fan. So we have to love him. So I want to get into your tight end preview. We mentioned it a little bit earlier. This is one of your latest articles over on Draft Sharks. So we all know that Andrew Cooper is Fantasy Alarm's resident tight end expert, but we like to have different perspectives on the show because that's what makes us better fantasy gamers. If you get caught in the loop of just take lock over and over and over again, you're never going to get better. So we know the basics of what you want out of tight ends, but you put together some really interesting information about return on ADP in this article. So tell us a little bit about what that data has shown and if it is kind of shifted the way that you draft tight ends.
Yeah, so it's definitely supported Coop's yin yang thing for sure. So like, just want to shout that out to the viewers and listeners who are familiar with all of his work, because it does highlight that there is extreme viability to that. Like, that is still definitely something that you can follow, but my whole perspective on it now is like kind of like all or nothing. I'm more than okay waiting and playing the yin yang game if I want to, but all of the stuff that we plotted out going back to 2016, looking at the preseason ADP and their eventual finishes, both in overall PPR scoring and in PPR points per game, pretty much just shows you in some pretty fancy charts. There are charts, and it's cool because it just says the top 3 tight ends that get drafted every year, pretty much unless they sustain some like crazy injury, hit. They're good. It will work. It will definitely work. And some of the data is just skewed by the fact that in that sample size, we have Rob Gronkowski. So it is what it is. But even when you like know that and factor that in, and you still see all the green on the color coded graph up top where, the high ADP is, it's like, wow, okay. So the people that are out there that are still haven't like caught up to the curve of like, well, why would I draft Travis Kelce in the first round of my draft? Because I think like most people who are like super into playing fantasy think that, and they're like, oh, like, what are you talking about? Of course you would, but not everybody's caught up to that. It's still a fairly recent wave over the last couple of years, but like, yeah, there's a reason. Like, Travis Kelce is just that much better than everybody else. Mark Andrews, not quite as good, but still pretty much better than everybody else. We expect TJ Hawkinson to be that dude. And also, we put in an honorable 4th in the article because Darren Waller, if he's, fully healthy, He's going to lead the Giants in receiving. I don't see what other option there is because those receivers, they didn't really address it that much. I'm sure Saquon Barkley is going to get his, but like for a running back to lead a team in receiving seems kind of unlikely. So just, I don't know. Take one of those guys. But if you don't do that, wait as long as you possibly can because there's that middle section of the top 12 where the return on your investment basically never hits. It is always a terrible idea, and don't do this to yourselves.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that middle tier because it seems like people are punting a little bit because they don't want to spend the capital on the top three. I have seen Waller, though, jump up over Hawkinson lately. He's getting a ton of steam after preseason. But then it's guys like George Kittle, who was very touchdown dependent last season with Brock Purdy, Kyle Pitts, who has either been injured or just completely left in the garage by Arthur Smith because he doesn't know how to properly utilize him. Then it's guys like Dallas Goedert with two very stout wide receivers, Pat Fryermuth, David Njoku, people like that. Do you think some of these mid-range guys could be a better option this season in particular? Or are you completely just the data shows year to year to year to year to year that this isn't going to hit?
I will always stick up for my man, Pat Fryermuth, because I believe that he is dat boy, and I believe that he is super good. But, without gushing more into Steelers fandom, I don't think I can do it. And I think the reason they don't hit more than there's football reasons, and then I think there's psychological reasons. Like the football reasons, kind of like you outlined, like whether there's just like touchdown regression coming because people are too focused on, scouting the box scores from last year, or just not being as cautious about the fact that these circumstances are in the quote unquote too many mouths to feed categories for some of these guys. But so there's that, which is obviously, a huge part of it, but there's the psychological aspect of like, okay, so like a few tight ends have gone, you've already drafted a few players, you're in like round 6, 7, 8, whatever it is, and you look at your starting lineup and you're like, oh, I see that hole at tight end. Oh, well, I have to have a good one. So, okay, I know that guy. And you just do it to fill a spot in your lineup. And it's like, no. I think that's honestly why some of those players end up being drafted where they are, is because there's this collective panic from like the, everybody but the 3 or 4 managers that already took a tight end, and they're like, oh, well, if I'm going to compete with them week to week, I'm going to have to grab this guy. And it's like, no, don't do it. Just don't do it. Wait as long as you possibly can. Because even if some of those dudes in those mid-ranges fall, like say, hypothetically, whoever the tight end 6 is in ADP, if they end up falling 2, maybe even 3 rounds past where they're supposed to be drafted, quote unquote, sure, go ahead, grab them. Because at that point, like the value that they're presenting in that weird mathy way that I can't really explain right now, like it intellectually, it just makes sense because it's like, okay, well, then they don't have to return on me taking them there. And it's a lot easier to justify expending like a pick that's a couple rounds later and all that blah. But just, I can't do it. I refuse. Not anymore.
Yep. I think that you hit on a very good spot. And that's something that we all need to be mindful going into our drafts. Don't just draft because you have a hole somewhere that you'll end up reaching. You will end up completely imploding your draft. And then if that value does fall to you, I think I got George Kittle in like the 7th or 8th round of a draft or something. Yeah. So at that point, I had to take him. And that's what we're talking about with value-based drafting, because at that point, he's, you're not investing a ton in his ADP cost. And he definitely does have that ability to return. My dogs are agreeing. So I always love when they agree. So one more question in this section, real quick. I used to be a tight end streamer because I couldn't bring myself to spend high draft capital on tight ends in the first rounds. But sometimes it worked out and sometimes it was just like, well, there's a 0 in my lineup. So if you're punting the position, what are some of the criteria that you're looking for? And is streaming actually an option?
It's an option. You just have to be mindful of like the 2 big things, just like the path to targets. You have to be able to, because you don't want to pick a dude that's like 4th or 5th in line for targets on his team that has to rely on a touchdown. because that's a non-starter for me. Like once you get into the streaming range, like yeah, I mean maybe you have to look for a dude who's like third in line or something like that. Maybe like kind of like a 3A 3B situation, but like at least look for that minimum threshold. And then even though I just got finished saying like, hey, don't look for the guys that you have to rely on for touchdowns, but also if you can, just look for teams that we can research these things. The numbers are out there. Like teams that tend to target tight ends in the red zone, we figure out who those guys are. Like I remember, like the Texans did that for a long time when Deshaun Watson was still there. There were those tight ends on those teams where if you just happen to throw the dart nice enough, it would soar and hit the bullseye on the board, proverbially speaking. Like you just have to. There's power in knowledge. There's numbers out there. Just like research stuff like that, and I think you'll probably be fine.
I completely agree with that. The research is one of the biggest things and that has helped me become a better fantasy player and then eventually turned me into an analyst because I never thought that this was going to happen. I just liked football. It was the research that put me here. So I want to switch to the very last topic. I've kept you almost the full time already. This has just flown by. It's been a joy to have you on the show. And if you're just now joining us, I've mentioned this several times before, but this is the biggest draft weekend of the year. And I don't know, maybe I'm following the negative, worrisome theme that I have going on today with like teams to worry about, things like that. But I want to talk about a do not draft list because while I do have guys I want to target, if I don't get them, it's not the be all end all. Whereas these do not draft guys, I'm completely out on them. So who are some of the guys that you were avoiding if you can, or are just completely out on?
Oh, I mean, my number one that I've been on about pretty much the entire summer is Jaguars running back Travis Etienne. You can't make me do it, and I won't do it because I see where he's being drafted in ADP. I believe it's like RB 12 or something like that, just like right there. And I don't see how this is going to happen. So I don't need somebody else to pull up my receipts from last year. I know that I was all in on the Travis Etienne thing because my assumption was like, oh, he could be like a Alvin Kamara light because he was like pretty good at pass catching in college and he played with Trevor Lawrence, so they already have the rapport and like there was a path to all of that, and he was going to be the lead running back, so I was like, okay, cool, bet, let's go. And what ended up happening was not that, and after James Robinson got dealt away last year, from like week 7 on, Travis Etienne's target share in that offense was 6.5. So, like, that's already kind of shattered. So, we already have the box that says, okay, he's not Alvin Kamara. Check. They bring in Calvin Ridley at the, trade deadline last year for those couple picks. Like, now he's back from suspension. He'll be doing his thing. I'm sorry, where is this uptick supposed to be for his receiving usage now that this like former superstar dude walking in? It's not like Ridley's old either. Okay, he's probably going to get back to being at least something close to his old self. So I don't really see that. And then drafting Tank Bigsby in the 3rd round, like in 6 seasons that Doug Peterson has been a head coach in the NFL, he has only given a running back more than 50% of the carries one time. Okay. Like this is a committee backfield. There's like, I can't see how Travis Etienne hits unless he just gets all of the high value touches in the red zone or miraculously finds a way to catch a bunch of passes. And that might be tough because we've heard the rumblings all offseason. Well, Tank Bigsby, look, he's a pretty good pass catcher. He was even pretty good at that in college. But then also the concept that Bigsby, look, he's physically a little bit bigger and more built to do that goal line stuff. So, it's a little bit of a twofer. I'm both fading Travis Etienne and also telling people, please draft Tank Bigsby because I think he's going to be really good.
Yeah, and all the things that you mentioned, and additionally, ETN had problems fumbling in the red zone last season. So I don't see how Doug Peterson is going to put his faith in that situation. I think you're absolutely right. I wrote an article about him early on in the season about why we should be out on him. And it wasn't all bad things. It was like weighing the positives, weighing the negatives, and then coming with a solution. And that's another thing that you have to do in fantasy football. You can't just take a part of the argument. You have to see the whole thing. But even after seeing the whole thing, I can't take ETN at ADP. Let's just quick hit these final 3 guys that you've got, and then let everybody know where to find you and what you got coming up.
All right, so the next one on my list was DeAndre Hopkins, because the Titans don't pass a lot. They just don't. They have been so low on the list annually for pass rate since Mike Vrabel took over. And the risk that Ryan Tannehill might get benched for somebody like Will Levis if the team struggles, I just don't see it. And plus the injury history that Hopkins has, it's not going to be a fun time. Why people are drafting him, where they're drafting him, doesn't really make sense to me. George Kittle.
Take Treylon Burks instead.
Yes,
guys.
do that, please. The knee injury thing might be a little bit sketchy, okay? But, maybe the first couple weeks it'll slow him down, but as time goes along, look, Treylon's that dude. He's very, very good. George Kittle. I had him on the list as well. I will say, though, where you got him, okay, do that, listeners, okay? If that happens to you, do that. But where I've seen him be drafted in ADP typically is just a little bit weird, because like we were saying earlier, like the touchdown rate from last year is insane. It was like so far above league average that him being able to replicate that is nuts. That streak that he had when Brock Purdy took over of just scoring a touchdown every game. I'm sorry. No, this is why you don't scout the box scores from the year before. People just don't do that. And then the last one, just Deshaun Watson. Part of it is that I just don't want him to do well. But then there's the part where he will probably be closer to where he was before everything. I don't think he's always going to be the player that he was that we saw last year. But for him to get all the way back to being that borderline superstar level after almost 2 years away from football, I can't get behind it. And there were a couple reports from camp just saying, like, as recently as like a week and a half ago, being like, well, sometimes, the deep ball game is struggling in these drills that they're doing. And like, I'm sure they'll figure it out. They have talented pass catchers. They've done a good job of surrounding him with weapons, but I can't do it. This concept that he's just going to bounce back to where he was is something that I'm never going to get on board with.
Well, and I think that this is something that's also very overlooked, maybe because I wanted to be a weather girl at 8 years old, but they play in Cleveland. Yes. That's when your fantasy playoffs are. There is a lot of bad weather in that AFC North and a lot of open air stadiums. So you have to think about that too, going into your drafts. Where are these guys going to play when it is the critical moment of your fantasy football season? I've made that mistake so many times, gone undefeated in the regular season, and then somebody had a bad weather game and it knocked me out of the playoffs. It's just, I know. This is why I'm going to get this great little trophy after Sunday. But Herms, thank you so much for coming on. You're just a joy. I enjoy it anytime I can talk to you, either online or in person, like at the Fantasy Football Expo. So let everybody know where they can follow you, where they can find you, and what you've got going up.
All right, well, friendos, you can follow me on the Twitter machine or X or whatever it is at Herms NFL, and you can find all of my written work over at draftsharks.com. We also have a YouTube channel where we do videos and stuff, and it's fun. And then also, I will just be out here on these Twitter streets talking about breakfast foods and all sorts of other stuff. I don't tweet about football a lot. I'll be perfectly honest. I do sometimes. So if you really want to get inside the brain, you kind of have to go to the website, www.draftsharks.com.
But that's what's so fun about you, is that not only are you such a knowledgeable analyst, you are just a fun, wonderful person. So thank you so much for coming on. I can't wait to do it again.
Thank you for having me.
See you later. Oh man, he's always so much fun. Thank you guys for hanging out in the chat and being as appreciative of Herms as I am. But let's get into it. Again, this hour has just flown by. It seems like it always does. Since there is less than a week until week 1, I want to get into some more Underdog pick'em entries. And if you guys are new here, Britt's Fantasy Blitz is sponsored by Underdog Fantasy and the biggest fantasy football tournament of all time, Best Ball Mania 4. If you don't know what Best Ball is, it's really simple. You just enter Best Ball Mania on Underdog's app or on your browser. You draft your team, and that's it. There's no waivers, no league management. Underdog optimizes your lineup weekly to create the highest score possible. And Best Ball Mania 4 is, in fact, your shot at a first place prize of $3 million. So if you want to get signed up on Underdog Fantasy, go to fantasyalarm.com/underdog or on the App Store, sign up with promo code ALARM, and your first deposit will be 100% matched up to $100. So let's just get into it. Since we only have a few minutes left here, let's hit on some player stats for the NFL season to start. Since again, we only have 6 days until football, guys. 6 days. I can taste it. All right. So the NFL season stats. Ezekiel Elliott, I am going to go higher than 4.5 touchdowns. The Patriots traded Pierre Strong to the Cleveland Browns last week. They left very little backfield competition. We're hearing very good things out of camp regarding Zeke's red zone usage. So I think that he goes higher on this stat easy. Derrick Henry, I'm also going to go higher than 9.5 rushing touchdowns. In 2021, Henry had 10 through 8 weeks before he got injured. I think even with the addition of DeAndre Hopkins, I don't think that there's any way that he doesn't get more than this because Tennessee is still a very run-heavy team, and they're going to incorporate their bell cow back into this offense. Third, and Herms, I hope that you're still listening. I have Najee Harris higher than 7 rushing touchdowns. He's had 10 the first few seasons, despite those efficiency issues or concerns that everybody has. The offensive line is very improved, and I think that the Steelers' offense will be better as a whole this season with the progression of Kenny Pickett in his second season, with George Pickens in his second season. I just see this offense scoring a lot more touchdowns than they did last year. I'm going to buck the trend here with this one. I'm going Rashad Penny lower than 600.5 rushing yards. This is going to be a full-blown committee backfield in Philadelphia. And in addition to that, I really don't trust that Penny can stay healthy and can stay on the field. He's only had one healthy season in his entire career. And with the likes of DeAndre Swift, Kenneth Gainwell, and yes, even the giant killer, Boston Scott, it's going to be very hard to top this mark. Oh, and did I mention a little rushing quarterback in Jalen Hurts? Again, we are going lower on Rashad Penny's 600.5 rushing yards. Finally, to round out the NFL season stats, we are going to go with Tony Pollard higher than 8 rushing touchdowns. This backfield is his. He owns it. He has a lean on this backfield. And with supreme touchdown vulture Ezekiel Elliott now with the Patriots, he should be easily able to get into the end zone 8 times. So that rounds out our NFL season picks. As I said, you've got only 6 days to get these picks in, people. But let's switch over to NFL Week 1 because there are some very intriguing picks for the first week of the NFL season. The Patrick Mahomes special for Thursday night is still available. If you don't know what that is, Underdog tends to surprise us with special stats. And this one is currently set at 0.5 total yards. So of course, we're going to go higher here. It's basically like a free square in this contest. So we cannot wait to hit higher on that stat. I'm also going to go Amon-Ra St. Brown higher than 6.5 receptions. We talked about it earlier in this show, but the Lions just really don't have anyone else to throw to. I think that St. Brown is going to get double-digit targets, and he's such a great receiver that he's going to come down with more than 6.5. I'm also sticking with the Lions in this next one, going with Sam Laporta higher than 4.35 fantasy points. Again, who else are they going to throw to here? Sam Laporta has been a standout at camp. They've got him, Jahmyr Gibbs, and Amon-Ra St. Brown, and that basically comprises their offense. So I think that 4.35 fantasy points is a lock to go higher. I'm going to switch it up here a little bit and go Chris Godwin higher than 5.5 receptions. They are facing the Minnesota Vikings, which we also touched on, have a horrible secondary, horrible defense overall, but a very horrible secondary. Godwin is more of that low average depth of target guy that Baker Mayfield has consistently dumped off passes to. So I think that he goes higher than 5.5 here as well. Finally, for week 1, I am going to go Christian McCaffrey lower than 63.5 rushing yards. We again talked about this earlier. They came out and said that they are not going to utilize Christian McCaffrey as an every down back in their offense because of his injury history, because he's better as a pass catcher, because they want to preserve him for the end of the season. I think that Elijah Mitchell's heavy, Jordan Mason and Tyrion Davis Price are also still mixed in there. So I think that Christian McCaffrey, while he does see the bulk of the receiving work here out of all the running backs, he goes lower than 63.5 rushing yards. And that wraps up our Underdog picks of the day. And again, if you want to get signed up to Underdog Fantasy, go to fantasyalarm.com/underdog, use the promo code ALARM, and first-time users get a 100% deposit match up to $100. Along with these pick'em contests, they are also running best ball contests, including Best Ball Mania 4 weekly contest and their new weekly winners best ball. There is something for everything, something for everyone on Underdog Fantasy. So get on over there, check that out, and keep your eye out on fantasyalarm.com for more Underdog content. So, guys, thank you so much for joining us. We have reached the end of our show. Again, this is the biggest draft weekend of the entire year. So, if you haven't got the Fantasy Alarm draft guide, go over to fantasyalarm.com/draft. That includes the fantasy football cheat sheet with it. If you just want the cheat sheet, you can purchase that on its own as well. Or if you want all the information all season long for not just NFL, but every sport, sign up for our All Pro package at fantasyalarm.com/all pro. We'll see you next Monday to recap some drafts and hear about how your weekend drafts went. Be sure to stay tuned next, 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern, the Fantasy Football Game Show from Front Yard Fantasy. Have a safe and happy holiday weekend. Go crush your drafts, and thanks for getting blitzed.